Welcome to IG's podcast series, Trading the Markets. I'm Jeremy Naylor. Coming up, the legalisation of cannabis in the recreational space in Canada has brought about much speculation that the UK is ready to move through the medicinal approval process to allowing recreational use of this currently restricted drug. The CBD industry in particular is fast growing. John Cooper from Gowling WLG.
The Misuse of Drugs Act, which is the thing that makes it illegal for you to possess cannabis, or anything that contains THC, which is the psychoactive ingredient, has not included within its schedule CBD. And the impact of that has been that shops have been able to sell CBD oil, and indeed that's quite a big product, particularly within the health, food and wellness sector.
Samantha Myers from Gowling WLG spoke about the investor opportunities.
There's a lot of money in Canada which is invested into cannabis, and that now is looking to invest into Europe and the rest of the world, including the UK. And I think there's a certain element of kind of push from investors who want to kind of see some movement in the UK market.
To find out more, stay tuned in our podcast, IG Trading the Markets. On the pod today, we're talking about the growing interest in the cannabis industry here in the UK. Canada has recently undertaken the giant leap of legalising the drug for recreational purposes after having taken some 20 years to move from the first steps of the process through medicinal application to allowing the use amongst the public as a recreational drug. Here in the UK at present, you can get a maximum of 5 years in prison still for possessing cannabis. Joining us to discuss the opportunities for the UK and the likely opposition, we'll be speaking to John Cooper. He's a partner at legal firm Gowling WLG and has more than 20 years' experience in the field. He heads up the group of legal experts who form the UK Public Law and Regulation team. And Samantha Myers is a legal director in the corporate group at Gowlings, specialising in corporate finance, mergers and acquisitions, and equity capital markets. Sam also has experience of acting for companies on IPOs, or initial public offerings. Welcome to you both. John Cooper, first of all, if I can, give us an introduction to cannabis. What is it that's grown, and what part of the plant do we use, and what's it produce?
Okay, well, potentially, we use all parts of the plant. Cannabis is a complex plant. It has a stem, seeds, leaves, flower, and there are varieties of cannabis which have different levels of active ingredients within them. So one variety you may have heard of is hemp, which has traditionally been grown predominantly for its stem, which has been used to form rope and other fibres and is still grown for that purpose. When people talk about cannabis, they normally mean the form of the plant which has a higher THC content. The THC is mostly contained in the flower, and that's used for what we would think of as recreational cannabis, as well as certain medicinal uses.
And the other form, CBD, we hear that in the context of CBD oil, which some people already use in the UK. So are you saying that is not illegal or has never been made illegal?
That's right. So in this country, CBD, which is a cannabinoid, that's an extract of cannabis, is an oil extracted from the plant. And it's always been regarded in UK law essentially as having no adverse properties. So the Misuse of Drugs Act, which is the thing that makes it illegal for you to possess cannabis, or anything that contains THC, which is the psychoactive ingredient, has not included within its schedule CBD. And the impact of that has been that shops have been able to sell CBD oil, and indeed that's quite a big product, particularly within the health, food and wellness sector.
So where is this made? I mean, we see it, as you say, in shops across the UK. Where does it come from? Where does this part of the cannabis plant come from?
So it's imported. You can, in this country, grow hemp, from which it is possible to extract CBD. You need a Home Office license to do that. But the Home Office won't give you a license if the end result of your growing hemp is to extract CBD. So, in fact, other countries, including in the rest of Europe, grow cannabis plants. CBD is extracted there and imported into this country.
Samantha Myers, I'm going to bring you in if I can and talk about the UK in terms of the regulation and where we are. As I said at the top, it's taken 20 years for Canada to get to where it is at the moment with the recent legalisation of recreational use cannabis. What are you hearing about the prospects here in the UK?
Well, it's an interesting one. I think it's discussed quite a lot as to whether the UK would actually follow in Canada's footsteps or not. I think some discussion has been around the way Canada has actually implemented its regime and whether it would be a fit for the UK. I think Canada has come across some problems and difficulties, and actually we wouldn't necessarily want to just adopt the Canadian scheme, as it were, without some amendments anyway. I think we are potentially some way off following Canada in Canada's footsteps. At the moment, we're focusing in the UK on medicinal cannabis, and I think the excitement around that has certainly been since last November. So whilst CBD, which John referred to just now, has been in shops for a while, the regulation around that changed recently, the novel foods regime. I think medicinal cannabis at the moment is much more of a focus in the UK at the moment. I think it's quite difficult at the moment to say how our regulation will pan out. There is a bit of a difference between what, let's say, the city wants in terms of investments and what the regulators have in place already for the regulatory regime. There's a lot of money in Canada which is invested into cannabis, and that now is looking to invest into Europe and the rest of the world, including the UK. And I think there's a certain element of kind of push from investors who want to kind of see some movement in the UK market, so that perhaps will lead where we go.
What about the companies that already operate here? My understanding is that they are listed in, or is it the Next Exchange?
Next Exchange, yes.
What do they do?
So at the moment, there are 4 companies listed on Next, which are all investment vehicles. So the differentiating factor there is they're not what we would commonly understand as a trading company. So a company with a business that would develop, let's say, medicinal cannabis. The entities which are listed at the moment seek to invest into other cannabis entities. So the difference in the market that we're seeing at the moment is you're now seeing trading companies, so companies that have developed medicinal cannabis or potentially CBD oils or wellness businesses, vapes, looking to now list in the UK, which is quite different from an investment.
John, what about the development side of it and where companies are and what they own in terms of the intellectual property rights? Because presumably somewhere along the chain there are some intellectual property rights that belong to certain companies. Is this something that you get heavily involved in? Is there something along the line here that we can discuss in terms of what the UK could contribute in terms of some of the property rights that are out there? Or is it really all about just the Canadian companies having pretty much stolen all of what's available in terms of the products that are out there?
Okay, so I wouldn't profess to be an expert in the intellectual property side of things, but essentially you have to split out the 3 different parts of the industry that I think Sam has alluded to. One is recreational, which isn't really anywhere in this country at the moment, and while there is certainly a lobby for us to legalise recreational cannabis, I think realistically we can say that's some way off ever becoming reality. And then the other 2 sides, which the industry is certainly looking at, are CBD as a wellness product and an ingredient in food, as a food supplement, and medicinal cannabis. Now, certainly in relation to both of those, there is potential IP around how they are used in particular products. So, for instance, if you wanted to bring forward a new medicine for a marketing authorization, then you would have to have proof that your medicine was both efficacious, it worked, in other words, and it was safe. You'd have to be able to demonstrate that. That requires a series of data from clinical trials, which you can present to the regulators to establish that the product should have its marketing authorization, its license. And companies which have that data will be able to obtain, when they get the marketing authorization, 10 years worth of exclusivity in relation to it, which will allow them to bring their products to market first and establish a position before anybody else does. So that's what's happening on the medical side. As far as CBD is concerned, the big elephant in the room is the issue of novel foods, which I'm sure you've heard about. The European Commission earlier this year decided that CBD was to be treated as a novel food, which brings it within a regulatory regime it hasn't previously been subject to. And that means that people need to make applications for novel food authorization if they're still to be able to sell it within the European Union. There is, to the best of my knowledge, one application which is currently being made, certainly on the European Commission's website, and that application purports to contain special proprietary data which is being used in support of it. We don't know what that data is, but somebody has brought forward an application where they say they have specialist data and they want a period of data exclusivity. So certainly people are beginning to look at how they use cannabis-derived products and how they can claim IP rights in relation to it, both for medicinal products and for CBD-related products.
Sam, what about the future for farming, let's call it farming, cannabis harvesting and so forth in this country? Presumably that's heavily regulated in Canada, isn't it?
I think so. I'm not an expert on the Canadian regime, but I mean, in the UK, you would have to have a cannabis growing licence, essentially. So you would have to go through a Home Office application to be able to get your licence to be approved to farm cannabis over here. And John's area than mine, but you would have to specify in that exactly what you're growing cannabis for, presumably what your business plan is.
Yeah, so in effect, it's easier to get a license to grow hemp. Hemp is cannabis with low THC content, but even then you need a license from the Home Office, and there will be restrictions on where you can grow it. You need to control the whole supply chain of the product. The Home Office needs to know what's happening to it when it leaves the site. And they need to know what you're using it for, and they're quite restrictive about the use. It's also possible to get licenses, normally smaller scale licenses, to grow cannabis for medicinal purposes or for clinical trials, and that's often the higher THC form of cannabis, which the Home Office will license, but again, subject to very tight restrictions in that case.
What about the corporate opportunity here? I think, Sam, back to you on this, because this is your area of expertise. What about the opportunity that could potentially be presented to corporates in the cannabis space?
Sure. So we've seen a lot of activity over the last year in this space. As a kind of corporate firm, we can help companies from startup to sale, takeover, whatever that is. So what we've seen, particularly this year, there's been a lot of activity around cannabis this year, a lot of conferences. People are looking for what they're calling pre-IPO investment money. So they basically want funding to build their businesses with a view at some point to list those on the stock exchange. And those businesses vary, as we said earlier. So recreational cannabis is not something we do in the UK. It's not something we as a firm would be able to work with. But we have seen companies who have a CBD business, whether that's oil or whether it's wellness or vapes or makeup, and we see licensed medicinal cannabis companies as well. And some of those are UK based and some of them are overseas, so there's a lot of interest from Canada in this space, but a lot of interest from European companies as well. My particular area of expertise is actually the capital market, so the listings. So most of the discussions I have had around this have been around whether companies can list on either the AIM market of the London Stock Exchange or the main market of the London Stock Exchange, and a few conversations about NEX, obviously, because there are investment vehicles on NEX already. So there is an opportunity for IPO.
Do you see these as being classified within the pharmaceutical sector?
That's how we're classifying them in terms of medicinal cannabis. I think it would sit more in our healthcare, potentially life sciences team, if it's anything other than medicinal. So if we're talking about a CBD wellness business, yeah.
Can you comment on any anecdotal evidence that you may have that there's potentially a lot of money waiting to enter this market? We hear about the fact that people are always looking for new investment opportunities. Do you think that is the case?
Yeah, I think that's certainly right. The Canadian market I think probably has boomed, is slightly coming off the edge of a boom at the moment, and valuations are becoming a bit more realistic. We are certainly seeing investors into the sector wanting to invest into the UK and into Europe now. There is a lot of interest in cannabis, particularly since last November, where the legislation changed, and you would have seen the newspaper reports around the children with epilepsy and seizures, and the activity really since then has been off the scale. But there is certainly money sloshing around to be invested, and it depends on what these particular investors are looking for, but there are people looking for private investment, so they're not necessarily interested in an IPO. It also depends on what that investor's risk capacity is. So do they want to be in a private entity or a public entity? What's their long-term investment proposal? Do they want to exit at some point? And that kind of dictates where they would go.
Do you envisage a fairly fat IPO pipeline building, waiting for that first indication that the government is willing to look at deregulation?
Yes, I do. We are seeing IPO activity already. I mentioned earlier the four that are on next, which are investment vehicles. We are seeing companies now, medicinal licensed companies, foreign companies that are either looking to dual list in London or new companies seeking their first listing. The timelines for these have been delayed more than a normal IPO process simply because of the amount of extra due diligence that's being undertaken on these companies, and that all relates to the regulatory regime over here. As time has progressed over just over this year, we've seen a bit more kind of activity towards those actually becoming listed vehicles. So an IPO process is typically 3 months. I think for a cannabis company at the moment, it's more likely to be double that, if not longer, simply because the pre-eligibility due diligence that the regulators are undertaking or requiring is just much more labour intensive. It requires a lot more of due diligence on the business, the licensing, the approvals that they have in the countries that they operate in and in the UK, and how those regulations apply over here. The Proceeds of Crime Act is dictating pretty much all of this extra paperwork, let's say. So we are seeing delays, and I think there are a number of IPOs in the pipeline already for AIM and the main market and for Next, but I don't think we will necessarily see any of those happen until later this year, before Christmas.
Does Brexit change anything for the UK over how the EU could potentially adopt new regulatory environment for the cannabis market?
So I think at least in the short to medium term, it probably doesn't present any opportunities that we don't currently have. Cannabis is not a harmonized regulated product across the European Union. So whereas with other opportunities that Brexit presents, which are to do something different from what harmonized European regulation requires, something in principle that gives us a commercial edge in the wider global market, that doesn't really benefit us here because we're not starting off from a heavily harmonized position. As far as the European Union is concerned, it is looking to move towards harmonization of cannabis, but that's really at the very early stages, and it will take several years before there is legislation on the books in relation to that. But we do have, of course, regimes which are affected by European law. The novel foods regime is a European law regime, and that bites on CBD. In principle, post-Brexit, we could decide to do something different. And, of course, our medicines licensing regime is also based on European law, and in principle there we could decide to do something different, although I actually think likely we will because of the benefits of staying aligned with the wider European market for our pharmaceutical industry.
We spent a lot of time looking at the potential for this market here in the UK to be opened up. Do you see a lot of opposition politically to the adoption of the laws that Canada has passed in bringing ultimately the recreational side of cannabis to the open market? Do you think that there will be very high hurdles to pass over for those that want to see adoption of cannabis in an open market here in the UK?
I think there are quite high hurdles, yes. So from a political point of view, the obvious question is, are the votes in it? In legalization, and at this stage, some people might call me a realist. At this stage, I think that there isn't enough of a head of steam around legalization for politicians to think that there are huge votes in moving in this direction. So I don't really see that being something that's likely to happen in the short term. I think what's much more important actually is how regulators behave. At the moment, there is something of a mismatch between what the law says and what regulators are enforcing. We've talked about CBD, for instance. The formal position at the moment on a European level is that CBD is classed as a novel food, and until it gets authorised and added to the EU novel foods list, it shouldn't be being sold as a wellness product or as a food supplement or food ingredient, but it is being. And the reason it's happening is simply because regulators have chosen not to enforce the strict law as things stand. Now, will that continue to be the case? Will they continue to be hands-off? In which case we will continue to have an active market in CBD? Or will it not? Will they at some point choose to tighten up and enforce the law? And that uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen, is bound to hold the market back. People who are already invested in selling these products are continuing to sell them, I think in many cases until somebody simply comes in and tells them to stop. But people who haven't yet invested in that market might think twice about it in the current circumstances because they don't know what the state of the law is when it appears to say one thing, but the regulators are not enforcing it. And those issues, I think, need to be resolved and can be resolved in the short to medium term in a way that will really free up the market. And that's probably the bigger thing we're looking at over the next 1 to 2 years, rather than a big political move towards liberalisation, in the Canada style.
Thanks indeed. We'll have to leave it there. That's it for this podcast on IG's Decoding the Markets. We've been speaking to John Cooper, partner at legal firm Gowling WLG, and his colleague from Gowling's legal director, Samantha Myers, about the prospects for the UK cannabis market. Thank you.